Shoot Extraordinary Conference, we are off and running and going. And I don't know about you guys, but I'm learning so much right now. I'm so excited and so thrilled about how we're all coming together to be a part of this huge conference right now. And as we get into the next course, I want to take a moment and introduce Joe. Joe, how are you?
I am great. How are you?
So good. I'm super excited. So as we get ready to look at your course and learn about Lensbaby from your perspective, tell us a little bit about your background and how you found Lensbaby.
Sure, yeah. I am a fine art lifestyle photographer based out of Sacramento, California. And I mainly photograph people, families, and kids. And I just throw in a little bit of self-portrait work in there just for more of the creative aspect. I also do a little bit of nature work just for more of the therapy aspect, just that comes with nature work. And I've been doing this for just a little over 5 years, about 5 to 6 years. And with regards to my journey with Lensbaby, I first started using Lensbaby lenses in 2016, towards the end of it, or beginning 2017. And my very first Lensbaby lens that I used was the Edge 80, actually. And I fell in love with it, with what it could do. But I didn't really, I think I just gave up too soon at that point when I picked it up. I was like, okay, I don't know how to get through the whole focusing. And I just remember giving it up. But then later, I think after 6 months to a year, I went back to it again. And then just, a lot of practice. And I just got hooked. I just got hooked to them. And I pretty much have almost all the Lensbabies in my collection right now. So that's my journey.
Amazing. Yeah, it's so funny how that works sometimes, how we remove ourselves from something and somehow through serendipity, it comes back to us. I don't know about everyone at the Shoot Extraordinary Conference right now, but I am particularly excited about your course. Can you tell us a little bit about what we're going to learn about?
Sure. My class is titled Embracing Love and Light. And what I mean by that is how we can embrace love. When I say love, it is self-love. It's, loving your, nature, maybe your kids or whatever, love is to you. And the whole storytelling element that you can get amazingly through these Lensbaby lenses. So I talk a little bit about how to capture storytelling, which is the love component. And then I also explain a little bit about how I achieve creative light with my Lensbaby work. And by light, I mean, working with harsh light, working with backlight, working with in-camera flares that I really love, working with light haze, working with light bokeh. So I talk about the different elements about how I use light in my work with relation to Lensbaby lenses, as well as how I approach love and how I embrace love and light together in my work. So I
Wow.
hope that
Well,
makes sense.
that's really beautiful. I love it. And I know that the Shoot Extraordinary audience is ready for this. We're going to get into the video right now. And Joe, we will see you for the Q&A after.
Hey everyone, this is Jyotsna Bhamidipati, and I am excited to talk a little bit about how I use my Lensbaby lenses to embrace love and light in my work. So just a little bit about me. I am a fine art lifestyle photographer. I am a Clicking Moms mentor, and I also currently teach at Click Photo School, a 4-week workshop called The Imperfectionist, which is all about rule breaking with intention. I'm also the creator of the emotive phone light presets, as well as the co-creator for the Elements presets that are available at Click & Co store. My Lensbaby journey started in 2017, and my very first Lensbaby lens optic was the Edge 80. You can find me on Instagram at MBM Photographs, and that is my website here. My Lensbaby collection has grown quite a bit since then. I have been shooting with Lensbaby optics for about 4 years now. And some of these optics pretty much stay on my camera body about 80-90% of the time for personal work, and almost about, I would say, 30-40% of the time for my client work as well. My lenses include the Edge, the Twist, Sol, Sweet 50, Velvet 56, the Omni filter, the latest Spark 2, as well as the macro converters. My very most used Lensbaby lenses that I would say would be the Edge 35 as well as the Sol 45. This image here to the right was taken with my Edge 35 lens optic, and the Edge 35 really stays on my camera body pretty much 70% of the time, and I would say the remaining 20-30% of the time I use my Sol 45. To get started, we'll be talking a little bit about how I embrace light with my Lensbaby optics. So I'll be discussing a little bit about manual focusing, about light in photographs, about light flares, which are a very unique capability of these optics, light haze, as well as light bokeh. And in the second part, when we talk about embracing love, which is basically storytelling, we'll talk about how to incorporate blur in your photos, how to get more of the fine art feel if you're someone who is an artist who really likes the whole fine art feel to your images, and how to use the Lensbaby optics to make that scene more, how to incorporate minimalism, and as well as storytelling with these optics. The first and foremost important part to keep in mind is that Lensbaby lenses are all manual focus. So if you've never used a manual focus lens, it is just something that you really need to practice on, pretty much, on a blank wall surface with either, if you have a readily available subject, your kids or, or just any prop, pretty much, flowers, just your teddy bear, just anything that you have, you can practice focusing on that particular object. I sometimes like to practice by also putting a blue tape on a wall. Blue because you can actually see where your focus will then fall. That's the way I actually practice using my Edge as well as the Sol. The Edge was a little bit harder to practice focusing in the beginning, just because I had to figure out where the tilt shift plane would land. But using this method, you would be able to practice and figure out where your focus falls. And each of these optics have a very unique place where the focus falls. That's just something to keep in mind, that the more you practice, the more you will figure out where your sweet spot is for your lens. Sweet spot for focus. Embracing light. So as photographers, we are constantly chasing light, right? So for me, I am a huge light seeker. I love incorporating all kinds of light in my work, whether it is backlight, photographing silhouettes, photographing shadows, seeking haze, harsh light. I am constantly trying to do something to figure out how to get the best light and mood and emotions showing in my work. And especially light is really a huge key in my work, or a huge element in my work, especially when it comes to the storytelling feel that I really like to seek in my work. So light flares. So one unique property rather, what I would say for the two lenses that I extensively use, which are the Sol 45 and the Edge 35, is the light flares with these lenses. And when shooting against backlight, depending on how you position yourselves, you would be able to see this flare that just comes into your camera, and it is just so beautiful. It is an in-camera light flare, And this shot here was shot with my, this image here was shot with my Sol 45. And it is a very unique property of the Sol 45 lens. Again, this one here is the Edge 35, and the light flares with the Edge 35 have a really rainbowy feel to it. As you can see, it just has this beautiful colors that it just gives out, and placing your subjects appropriately at a position such that they are framed by this flare just elevates your image and elevates your image to another level by adding a wow factor to your image. And this typically happens when you shoot against backlight. A couple of more examples of lens flares and of a rainbow lens flare that you get with your Edge 35. As you can see with this image here, it is a very light flare. And this one, it's a little bit more. This one, it's a little bit more. So it is a combination of where you position yourself to see the light hitting against your lens, as well as how much the sun is going down or how close you are to the sunset. Light haze. This is again something else that I really love playing with in camera. My Edge 35 has an amazing quality when it comes to light haze. I pretty much position myself such that I don't see a flare in camera, but I see haze in camera, and I tend to shoot slightly away from the sun, so that the sunlight is not directly hitting my lens, but the light is still coming into the lens or into the camera, and I can see this beautiful haze that is produced with the Edge 35. Light bokeh. Light bokeh is again very unique, and it is produced. You can have this with the Lensbaby optics. In fact, most of these, the three ones that I have over here, were taken at night so that I could have them saved for me to use as an overlay in the future. I typically like to do something like this where I shoot, and this is just Christmas light bokeh. So I do something like this where I take some images during nighttime so that I see this blackish background. And then I take an image of just the Christmas lights, either with my Edge 35, the Sol, the Velvet, and so that it's completely out of focus. And that would really give you this beautiful circular light bokeh. The other kind of light bokeh that I love is when I use water. And this image, for example, was produced as a double exposure. And it is a silhouette of my daughter where I had taken an image of my daughter against the window. So basically it was a silhouette. And then I took a second shot of just the water bokeh. And this image was shot with my Sweet 50. And I just simply combined both of these images in post-processing. And the left image was my final result. The right image was done completely in camera, and as you can see, this effect was produced because I used the Sweet 50 and I focused on my daughter, and everything else just fell out of focus. Embracing love with storytelling. So another thing that I really love to do with my Lensbaby lenses is use them for the storytelling component. As you can see in this image, my kids were just playing in a trail that we regularly visit, and I shot this during the golden hour. So the light was going down, it was sunset, and I placed myself really further away from them so that I could see my kids' shadows as well as this beautiful dappled light and some shadows. And towards the left, I got this beautiful in-camera blur that was produced as a result of using my Edge 35 on the go. embracing blur. So all of the Lensbaby lenses have a certain amount of blur in them. And to me, incorporating blur into my work has been a game changer, especially where I am now able to isolate my subject from the background and have the rest of the image or my background just fall into the background. And my subject just neatly pops up or pops out, and everything else just really falls away out of focus. And using any of these lenses, you could do this with the H35 or the Sol, the Velvet, or any of those lenses that you typically use, and you get this beautiful subject to background separation when you incorporate blur. And this is my absolute favorite thing to do, especially when it comes to storytelling images. And I, as a fine art photographer, have also been very particularly fond of freelancing. And to me, when I use my Lensbaby lenses, it is very close to freelancing, especially the H35 or the H80. And hence, I am constantly picking up my H35 because I really want to get very similar or as close as possible to the freelancing effect that I used to love in my work. I also use the H35 for environmental portraiture, and if I'm out on the go, it really elevates the storytelling when I'm outdoors as well, to capture the environment my kids are in. For fine art, so I love using the Sol or the Edge, especially for creating fine art feel and a fine art portrait work in my client work or in my personal work. The Sol 45 gives really a very unique blur all around the image, except the center part, where you feel the blur is almost moving to highlight your subject, where your focus would be falling. So this image was shot with my Sol 45, and it just highlights the ballerina that I was shooting just so beautifully that she really just stands out. So these images here are a mix of my H35 and my Sol 45. My image to the right was shot using my H35 lens, and the bottom two images were shot using my Sol 45. And it really helps to using these lenses, if you are someone who likes to shoot moody portraits, it really helps to block out any of the light that you don't want in the frame by letting everything else in your background just fall into the dark or fall into the shadows. That way, my subject is just really neatly highlighted, while everything else really just falls into the background blur. And the blur is just very subtle, so that you still see sometimes what's happening in the backgrounds, but your subject really neatly just pops out. So these images here, continuing with the fine art aspect, these images here were shot with my Sol 45. And as you can see, it just really helps you focus on the subject as to what you really want the viewer to see, by letting everything else just have a very smooth blur to it. And it's graduated, but it's very smooth. And that just really elevates the images. Whether you're doing some creative work like this with dapple light, or you're shooting something like this of your kids where you really want the whole smooth, creamy feel to your images as well. All three images over here were shot with my Sol 45. Well, actually, all my top two images were shot with my Sol 45, and my bottom image was shot with my H35, because this is the very typical lens flare that you would see with my H35. Minimalism. So I love incorporating minimalism in my work, and it really elevates the whole dreaminess to your images. If you're someone who really likes the whole dreamy, magical feel to your work. So if you're someone who likes to shoot in fog, or you have you have sunrise, sunset, or even just an overcast day as well, since this image was shot in an overcast day, it really elevates the image to make it look almost like a painting. This one was shot with my H35, and I just love how smooth and creamy the blend is between the in-focus parts of the image versus the non-focus parts of the image. Continuing on with minimalism, this shot again here was shot with my Sol 45, and it is a really magical lens if you're someone who loves light flares in camera while you play with silhouettes and while you play with light. Storytelling component, again, I tend to use my H35 quite a bit for my creative storytelling images, where, as I mentioned earlier, it really just gives in a very smooth, subtle blur to your background, where you could still see what's happening in your background, but your subject just pops out beautifully by elevating the entire image this way. You're just enhancing the whole storytelling feel to the image. In summary, to get better at using Lensbaby optics in your work, the first and foremost, the key point here is to work on your photography skills and to see what you're really drawn to most. As an artist, I really love bringing out emotion in my work, and regardless of what lens I use, and to bring out emotion is the absolute key to what I do with my work. So anything I do, that's my number one thing that I want to see with my images. So working on your photography skills and seeing what you are most drawn to is the key point here. Using creative lenses such as Lensbaby really helps you stand out in a competitive market, whether you're shooting personal work or whether you're shooting client work. If shooting personal work only, these optics really open up numerous possibilities with the creative effects that they can have. As you've seen, just with the H35, there's just multiple ways that you can use the H35 lens in your work, whether it is to incorporate minimalism, whether it's to bring out the fine art feel, whether it is to enhance the bokeh in your work or get light flares. So just, another thing to keep in mind is with each of these optics, use them for a month at a time, at a minimum, and seeing what you can actually do with each optic for the month before you feel that, okay, I am not able to focus with this lens and it's too hard for me. The whole manual focusing, whether it is shooting self-portraits, whether it's shooting clients, whether it's shooting your kids who are on the go, the key here is to keep practicing and make a project out of them. Do a monthly creative project per optic to improvise on your manual focusing skills. Getting creative with client work. So I have shot with my Edge lenses as well as my Sol 45 lens creatively for my client work as well. This image was all of these images were taken with my Edge 35 or my Sol 45. And if you have clients who are willing to be more creative, it just opens up so many possibilities, and it surely will enhance your work. Just to think a little bit about using Lensbabies for self-portraiture. So a while ago, I started actually doing self-portrait work using the Lensbaby optics, especially the H35 as well as the Sol 45, and using these creative lenses really opened up the possibilities of me not being camera shy. As being a photographer who is always behind the camera, to see myself in front of the camera, I would be somebody who would not know what to do with my hands, not know where to look into the camera, where to point towards. But once I learned that Lensbaby lenses really help you put the part of the image that you really don't want to see into blur, and also focusing on the parts of the image that you want to be focusing on, it really just elevated my whole self-portrait game entirely. I've done double exposures with slow shutter speed. As example, this one over here with my H35. I've shot unique portraits with my Sol 45. This was my Sol 45. This was my Sol 45. This image was shot here with my H35. And I have shot outdoor portraits with my H as well as my Sol 45. I've shot slow shutter. It just gives you the whole possibilities of what you can do with the creative lenses, and how to be in front of the camera, but also embrace the blur, and also how to be okay with seeing yourself in front of the camera. Made it much more possible for me by just getting in touch by using my Lensbaby lenses for my self-portrait work.
Hey everyone, this is Jo here, and I'm excited to take you behind the scenes to show you how I photograph with my Lensbaby lenses to embrace love and light in my work. Come on, follow me along.
Shooting indoors in harsh light is my absolute favorite. When shooting indoors in harsh light or in backlight, I often pay special attention to where the light is coming from and play with my perspective and angles. Here I was using my Lensbaby Sol 45 optic, and to focus with my Sol 45, I was moving slightly to the left, slightly to the right to get the perfect angle and to get the perfect in-camera flare that I was hoping to achieve. I often change my positioning and my perspective with relation to my subject to get different angles and different viewpoints of the story that I'm trying to tell through my images. I also often like to get creative while playing around with reflections and shadows in the same space. I play around with the tilt of my Edge 35 optic, or I sometimes manipulate the blades of the Sol 45 to limit the amount of light that's coming into my camera. Here I was using my Edge 35 optic to take my daughter's images as a reflection through the mirror, while I was also trying to get some shadows in the same image. I also often like to play with double exposures, slow shutter speed, and get as creative as I can while using my Edge 35 optic or my Sol 45 while shooting indoors. The beauty about using my Edge optic indoors is the softness at the edges of the frame. Shooting for minimalism and blur. When I'm out and about with my kids, I often pick up my Edge 35 optic for its amazing storytelling capability, as well as to photograph minimalism, as well as some incredible light flares and blur that you can achieve in camera while using this optic. I let my kids play together, just watch them connect with each other, interact, and photograph them just having fun together. I establish focus with my Edge 35 by simply moving the focusing rings as well as repositioning myself as needed to grab focus on the elements in the image that I really want to focus on. Whether it is my daughter who wants to twirl around, or whether it is to capture the gorgeous views, or to get some beautiful in-camera light flares and haze. I do all of that by simply repositioning myself until the light hits the camera at the right angle. I give my daughter simple directions, but most often it is a matter of just watching her have fun and play in the place that I'm photographing her in. My Lensbaby Edge optic often helps me to achieve dreamlike images by helping me focus on movement that I often seek in my work. I often seek to capture movement in my work as it helps me make my images feel alive, as well as they make the emotions that I'm hoping to convey feel much more real. I sometimes use the live view on my camera to track my moving subjects so that I can get a better focus on them. I often go back to the Edge 35 or the Sol 45 because of its closeness to the freelanced look that I very much fell in love with very early on in my photography. The dreamlike feel that I can achieve in my images, as well as the minimalism and the subtle blur that I can achieve, makes me often go back to use my Lensbaby optics. In this portion of my shooting video, I'm going to be taking you behind the scenes as to how I shoot self-portraits and give you tips and tricks as to how I use my Lensbaby optics to achieve focus, as well as to get closer to the vision that you're hoping to achieve in your images. To achieve proper focusing with my manual focus lens for self-portraits, one way I achieve this is to target an object in an empty room and focus on that object and place yourself to go and stand in that particular space. And once you go and stand in that particular spot, you should be using either your interval timer in your camera or your timer remote, or you could use the Camera Connect app for your camera to be used on your cell phone. When it comes to self-portraits, I often like to use props such as glass or fabric to further enhance my creative vision and help me get closer to the concepts and the storytelling that I often seek in my work. Being a photographer who often loves moody portraits, I do like to place myself either in harsh light or dapple light while I underexpose my overall image. Playing with light and composition in the same space helps me get more creative as playing with light
and perspective in the same space that I often shoot helps me get more creative with my vision and concepts in my self-portrait work. Another big important element for self-portraits especially are emotions. When it comes to capturing emotions in my self-portraits, I often seek the real. Photographing self-portraits often require you to be vulnerable, as when you are your true authentic self, that is when your true emotions are showcased through your work. Some of my best self-portraits have happened because I let myself just be and experience whatever emotions I was feeling, and letting myself just be how I was feeling in front of the frame. One of the biggest advices when shooting self-portraits would be just to let yourself be free and try to be your authentic self in front of your camera, as well as to simply enjoy the process and to not think of creating a masterpiece with every image. If I shoot 10 to 20 images during one session, I often get 2 to 3 images that are worthy of sharing and keeping, while the rest of the images, I just see them as a learning experience as to how I can do better the next time I shoot. Self-portraits usually are not very complicated, but they require a lot of patience and a lot of practice to let yourself just be and embrace the imperfections that you see in front of the camera. It is through self-portraits this year that I have been able to embrace love and light, especially self-love, during these difficult times of 2020.
Dreamy artistic images.
Emotive and soulful imagery.
That extra dimension and quirkiness.
Really unique images.
Se olvidaron completamente.
Extraordinary results.
Creamy bokeh and a dreamy feel.
Creative and quirky landscapes.
Unique blur effect.
Fun flares.
Poetic, oniric look.
Something extraordinary.
Wow, Shoot Extraordinary Conference. What a beautiful, beautiful presentation. Joe, thank you so much for that. I mean, I know that I'm not alone in saying that I'm really moved by this. How are you feeling about that presentation? It was amazing. You know, I think about self-portraits and the journey that I had on my own and learning how to really photograph. I learned how to use a camera by taking an unbelievable number of photos of myself. Right. What has kind of stepped you into that? You know, I don't think a lot of people recognize that that is a great form of expression through photography.
Right. I have been doing this for 3+ years now. But when I picked up my camera for the first time 3 years ago to turn that towards me, it was basically to document my motherhood journey, to photograph myself with my last daughter, and basically just to document us, our whole journey together. But then the more I started doing it, the more I just realized that if it's not just our journey, but it's my journey as well, as much as it is her journey or our togetherness. So initially, I just remember being totally uncomfortable, especially, I think, women who see so many flaws in ourselves, where you don't like, there's just so many things that you don't always like about yourself. And I think just doing something like that, where you're actually turning the camera towards yourself to find little things that you can be proud of. And even if you don't share it with anyone, but sometimes people think that, art has to be shared, and that's completely fine too. But if you really feel uncomfortable sharing those images with anyone, that's fine. Just create them. The way I put it is create them as if you're making a date with yourself. So you're just carving out that time, making a date with yourself, and whatever that is, you may be in your pajamas, you may be dressed, whatever you want to do, whatever your story is, whatever your concept is, that 20 minutes, 30 minutes is the time that you're hopefully spending the time just with yourself, so that's what I think just prompted me more and more, just learning, how much it actually helped me just get away from everything and use that as a form of therapy as well.
Yeah, that's really powerful. I mean, such a great statement, especially, towards the end of the video, you mentioned just kind of like stepping into this self-love journey with yourself. I mean, that's really beautiful and powerful. Our first question here comes from Dana. What has kept you inspired through this year, despite all of the challenges? Amazing question. I was going to ask the same thing.
So this year has obviously been so challenging for, so many of us. I mean, it's everyone, right? But one thing I think that just has kept me going, that nobody says that you have to pick up your camera every single day. Do it when you feel like you have to. Do it when you strike an inspiration. And where does inspiration come? It could be anything, right? You could be somebody who just goes on a walk and be inspired. If you're someone who doesn't mind turning the camera towards yourself and just playing with that, do that. Whatever you feel you are connected with the most. If you are someone who's connected with humans, you want that human connection, and that's what you miss the most. Photograph your kids. If your kids are not up to it, they just don't want anything to do with you, and that's when you turn the camera on yourself, right? So I think that's what just really kept me going. And the other thing is, especially with Lensbaby lenses, I think the whole best part is when I pick up a lens, whatever, a Sol 45, Velvet 56, I have all of them. I don't know exactly what I'll get, even though I know what the lens does. Each time I pick it up, I think I get something different. Maybe there's just something different that I don't know, that I have never experimented with. And that's what I really like, that each time you pick up a lens, you can create something different, and I think that's just what really keeps me going.
Yeah, that's really beautiful. And there's a lot to be said about that too, because within just the understanding that every day you can do something different, I mean, there's inspiration in that too. But the big part of it, like you said, is you don't have to do it every day. We don't feel inspired every day. And the people who say that we should or may, I don't know that's necessarily true. Next question from Camilla is, how do you find the balance between breaking the rules and respecting them?
Right. So I always say, I teach a class about breaking rules, so I totally get that question a lot. So one thing about breaking rules, right? It's about knowing what rule to break. So which means that for breaking rules, you have to be someone who's already confident enough in knowing all the rules that are out there, leading lines or composition or light, or how do you have better control on light, and all of those basic necessary skills are very important. And once you know the rules, don't try to think that you have to, throw out all the rules out of the window. That's not really how you break rules. Just go one thing at a time. So if it is blur, like how do you bring out intentional blur in your work? Focus, on one thing. I always talk in terms of like mathematical equations, like keep everything constant, but like one variable. So that way, like, if you have your light is constant, your composition is constant, but maybe you introduce blur and that's the variable right there. Or your composition is constant, your focus is constant, but your light is the variable. So just keep everything constant and just change one thing at a time. And that really helps you to expand and work on each technical element and figuring out what rule you want to break and practice, whether it is for building your portfolio for ClickPro or whether it is for your own personal journey.
Yeah, that's such a great point, because there's no rule that says you have to do everything at once. There's always space to really nail something down and then just add bit by bit, and you'll be surprised what small adjustments can do. Our next question here comes from Regina. What are some of your favorite prompts with self-portraits and why?
Yeah, so I am a super lazy person. I'll just go out and say that up front. I mean, I have, I'm a lazy person, but then I think just to go with that, my ideas are always like just going in my head, like, oh, I want to do this, I want to do that. So my ideas are always, never ending. So I always have like a list of things that I want to go buy for self-portraits. I want to get vintage dresses. I want to get beautiful hats. But, obviously, like time and money and, all of that doesn't happen in space, right? Because this year has been super difficult to find space as well when the whole family is in the house. But when it comes to, props, I try to keep it simple, cheap, easy, whatever you can find in your house. My favorite to go is just fabric. And I say for fabric, what I do is if you have any old, any transparent tablecloths that you don't use, keep that as a prop. Any, I'm trying to think, lace, anything. I've gone to Joann before, just the Joann fabric store, and gone and found a tulle, and it's like 50 cents, just to cut out whatever, and whatever piece you want to just go cut out and find different color, piece of transparent fabric from there. And then you will, at that point, that you haven't spent anything more than $2 or $3. And then I just cut small holes on it so that I can place it on my camera if I'm trying to shoot through something. But my ideas are always really cheap and easy and, simple things that I can find around the house. I just cut out dresses. I cut out tablecloths. I use hats, or I use shoes, or like anything simple that's laying around. In the flowers, like in your garden, anything that's around you, just start with something really simple without like just going and buying and spending too much money, or do it yourself props that you think are more personal to you. For me, it's always relates back to what's personal to you. So the props, whatever you decide to use, have to relate back to you and who you are and what are you trying to convey through them.
Yeah, great points. And I'm going to ask a question from my end, because I'm really curious, and I think the audience would be too. How often do you have to deploy patience with yourself, especially while doing self-portraits? Because I was looking at a couple of these and thinking to myself, she took that photo 75 times. Oh, yes. She got up, checked the camera, went back, laid down, took the photo, got up, checked the camera. What role does patience play in your life as a photographer?
Goodness. And that's exactly the reason why I did not delete that footage, so that people actually can see it's like going back and forth. It's like a million times. And nobody just knows, oops, I just went there, boom, I clicked a button and the self-portrait happened. That's really never happens. Maybe on a rare, lucky occasion, who knows? But I'm always going back and forth and back and forth. So the number one thing is always like, see if you can find a space that's like dedicated in a way so that nobody else can enter that space, if you have kids or, other people around, because that can, at least for me, it just interferes with my mental balance. And I start to get frustrated that, I'm trying to achieve fine tuning or focus here. And there's just so many distractions going on. But just keeping yourself and your space, just giving yourself space really helps. But patience is like the number one thing. And just going back and forth. And like I said, you may take 20, 30, 40 photos and you may get one that really turned out beautiful and that you really love. And that's completely okay. It doesn't mean that the rest of them are completely worthless, but you made an effort, right? Because you had a learning point that, okay, so this is what my lens does. This is what I needed to do to achieve focus. This is what I'm going to do next time. So I think that just goes in as a learning lesson to go back and do it the next time.
Yeah, absolutely. Great points. And Joe, amazing presentation. Thank you so much. Shoot Extraordinary Conference. I hope that you guys have an amazing time. We're going to take a little bit of a longer break here for about 30 minutes, and we will come back with our next presenter. And I don't know about you, Joe, but this has been absolutely amazing. And we are so grateful for you. And I just want to say thank you again for your time to the Shoot Extraordinary audience. And we will see you guys in 30 minutes.
Thank you.